sure that the whole House will join me in condemning Saturday's car bomb attack in Londonderry and paying tribute to the bravery of the Northern Ireland Police and the local community who helped to ensure that everyone got to safety. This House stands together with the people of Northern Ireland in ensuring that we never go back to the violence and terror of the past. Mr. Speaker, turning to Brexit, following last week's vote, it is clear that the government's approach had to change, and it has. Having established the confidence of Parliament in this government, I've listened to colleagues across Parliament from different parties and with different views. Last week I met the leader of the Liberal Democrats, the Westminster leaders of the DUP, SNP, Plaid Cymru and the Green Party, and backbench members from both sides of this House. My right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, also had a number of such meetings. The government has approached these meetings in a constructive spirit, without preconditions, and I'm pleased that everyone we met with took the same approach. I regret that the right honourable gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, has not chosen to take part so far. I hope he will reflect on that decision. Given the importance of this issue, we should all be prepared to work together to find a way forward, and my ministerial colleagues and I will continue with further meetings this week. Let me set out the 6 key issues which have been at the centre of the talks to date. The first 2 relate to the process for moving forwards. First, there is widespread concern about the possibility of the UK leaving without a deal. And there are those on both sides of the House who want the government to rule this out. But we need to be honest with the British people about what that means. The right way to rule out no deal is for this House to approve a deal with the European Union. That is what this government is seeking to achieve. The only other guaranteed way to avoid a no-deal Brexit is to revoke Article 50, which would mean staying in the EU. There are others who think that what we need is more time, so they say we should extend Article 50 to give longer for Parliament to debate how we should leave and what a deal should look like. This is not ruling out no deal, but simply deferring the point of decision. And the EU are very unlikely simply to agree to extend Article 50 without a plan for how we are going to approve a deal. So when people say rule out no deal, the consequences of what they are actually saying are that if we in Parliament can't approve a deal, we should revoke Article 50. Mr. Speaker, I believe this would go against the referendum result. And I do not believe that is a course of action that we should take or which this House should support. Second, all the opposition parties that have engaged so far, and some backbenchers, have expressed their support for a second referendum. I've set out many times my deep concerns about returning to the British people for a second referendum. Our duty is to implement the decision of the first one. I fear a second referendum would set a difficult precedent that could have significant implications for how we handle referendums in this country, not least strengthening the hand of those campaigning to break up our United Kingdom. It would require an extension of Article 50. We would very likely have to return a new set of MEPs to the European Parliament in May. And I also believe that there has not yet been enough recognition of the way that a second referendum could damage social cohesion by undermining faith in our democracy. Mr. Speaker, we do not know what the right honourable gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, thinks about this because he has not engaged. But I know there are members who have already indicated that they wish to test the support of the House for this path. I do not believe there is a majority for a second referendum. And if I am right, then just as the government is having to think again about its approach going forwards, then so too do those members who believe this is the answer. The remaining issues raised in the discussions relate to the substance of the deal, and on these points I believe we can make progress. Members of this House, predominantly but not only on the government benches and the DUP, continue to express their concern on the issue of the Northern Ireland backstop. All of us agree that as we leave the European Union, we must fully respect the Belfast Agreement and not allow the creation of a hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, nor indeed a border down the Irish Sea. And I want to be absolutely clear, in the light of media stories this morning, this government will not reopen the Belfast Agreement. I have never even considered doing so, and neither would I. With regard to the backstop, despite the changes we have previously agreed, there remain two core issues: the fear that we could be trapped in it permanently, and concerns over its potential impact on our union if Northern Ireland is treated differently from the rest of the UK. So I will be talking further this week to colleagues, including in the DUP, to consider how we might meet our obligations to the people of Northern Ireland and Ireland in a way that can command the greatest possible support in the House. And I will then take the conclusions of those discussions back to the EU. From other parts of this House, concerns have also been raised over the political declaration. In particular, these have focused on a wish for further precision around the future relationship. The political declaration will provide the basis for developing our detailed negotiating mandate for the future, and this new phase of negotiations will be different in a number of ways. It will cover a far broader range of issues in greater depth, and so will require us to build a negotiating team that draws on the widest expertise available, from trade negotiators to security experts and specialists in data and financial services. And as we develop our mandate across each of these areas, I want to provide reassurance to the House. Given the breadth of the negotiations, we will seek input from a wide range of voices from outside government. That must include ensuring Parliament has a proper say and fuller involvement in these decisions. It is government's responsibility to negotiate, but it is also my responsibility to listen to the legitimate concerns of colleagues, both those who voted leave and who voted remain, in shaping our negotiating mandate for our future partnership with the EU. So the Government will consult this House on its negotiating mandate to ensure that members have the chance to make their views known, and that we harness the knowledge of all select committees across the full range of expertise needed for this next phase of negotiations, from security to trade. This will also strengthen the Government's hand in the negotiations, giving the EU confidence about our position and avoiding leaving the bulk of parliamentary debate to a point when we're under huge time pressure to ratify. Now, I know that to date Parliament has not felt it has enough visibility of the Government's position as it has been developed and negotiated. It has sought documents through humble addresses, but that mechanism cannot take into account the fact that some information, when made public, could weaken the UK's negotiating hand. So as the negotiations progress, we will also look to deliver confidential committee sessions that can ensure Parliament has the most up-to-date information whilst not undermining the negotiations. And we will regularly update the House, in particular before the 6 monthly review points with the EU foreseen in the agreement. While it will always be for Her Majesty's Government to negotiate for the whole of the UK, we are also committed to giving the devolved administrations an enhanced role in the next phase, respecting their competence and vital interests in these negotiations. I hope to meet both First Ministers in the course of this week, and will use the opportunity to discuss this further with them. And we will also look for further ways to engage elected representatives from Northern Ireland and regional representatives in England. And finally, we will reach out beyond this House and engage more deeply with businesses, civil society and trade unions. Fifth, honourable members from across the House have raised strong views that our exit from the EU should not lead to a reduction in our social and environmental standards, and in particular workers' rights. So I will ensure that we provide Parliament with a guarantee that not only will we not erode protection for workers' rights and the environment, but we will ensure this country leads the way. To that end, my right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, indicated the Government's support for the proposed amendment to the meaningful vote put down by the honourable member for Bassetlaw, including that Parliament should be able to consider any changes made by the EU in these areas in future. My right honourable friend and others will work with members across the House, businesses and trade unions to develop proposals that give effect to this amendment, including looking at legislation where necessary. Sixth, and crucially, a number of members have made powerful representations about the anxieties facing EU citizens in the UK and UK citizens in the EU who are waiting to have their status confirmed. We have already committed to ensuring that EU citizens in the UK will be able to stay, and to continue to access in-country benefits and services on broadly the same terms as now in both a deal and a no-deal scenario. Indeed, the next phase of testing of the scheme for EU nationals to confirm their status has launched today. And having listened to concerns from members and organisations like the 3 Million Group, I can confirm today that when we roll out the scheme in full on the 30th of March, the Government will waive the application fee so that there is no financial barrier. So there is no financial barrier for any EU nationals who wish to stay. And anyone who has or will apply during the pilot phase will have their fee reimbursed, and more details about how this will work will be made available in due course. Some EU member states have similarly guaranteed the rights of British nationals in a no-deal scenario, and we will step up our efforts to ensure that they all do so. Mr. Speaker, let me briefly set out the process for the days ahead. In addition to this statement, today I will lay a written ministerial statement as required under Section 13(4) and 5 of the EU Withdrawal Act, and table a motion in neutral terms on this statement as required by Section 13(6). This motion will be amendable and will be debated and voted on in this House on the 29th of January, and I will provide a further update to the House during that debate. To be clear, this is not a rerun of the vote to ratify the agreement we have reached with the European Union, but the fulfilment of the process following the House's decision to reject that motion. The process of engagement is ongoing. In the next few days, my ministerial colleagues and I will continue to meet with members on all sides of the House and with representatives of the trade unions, business groups, civil society and others as we try to find the broadest possible consensus on a way forward. Whilst I will disappoint those colleagues that hope to secure a second referendum, I do not believe that there is a majority in this House for such a path. And whilst I want to deliver a deal with the EU, I cannot support the only other way in which to take no deal off the table, which is to revoke Article 50. So my focus continues to be on what is needed to secure the support of this House in favour of a Brexit deal with the EU. And my sense so far is that the 3 key changes are needed. First, we will be more flexible, open and inclusive in the future in how we engage Parliament in our approach to negotiating our future partnership with the European Union. Second, we will embed the strongest possible protections on workers' rights and the environment. And third, we will work to identify how we can ensure that our commitment to no hard border in Northern Ireland and Ireland can be delivered in a way that commands the support of this House and the European Union. In doing so, we will honour the mandate of the British people and leave the European Union in a way which benefits every part of our United Kingdom and every citizen of our country. And I commend this statement to the House.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Prime Minister for an advanced copy of her statement, and I join with her in condemning the car bomb attack we've seen in London during the weekend, and commend the emergency services and the local community for their response. Mr. Speaker, the huge achievement of the Good Friday Agreement in reducing violence in Northern Ireland must never be taken for granted. It was an historic step forward, but we cannot take it for granted. The Government still appears not to have come to terms with the scale of the defeat in the House of Commons last week. The Prime Minister seems to be going through the motions of accepting the result, but in reality is in deep denial. The logic of that decisive defeat is that the Prime Minister must change her red lines because her current deal is undeliverable. So can she be clear and explicit with the House? Which of her red lines is she prepared to move on? The Prime Minister's invitation to talks have been exposed as a PR sham. Every opposition party politician came out of those meetings with the same response. Contrary to what the Prime Minister has just said, there was no flexibility, there were no negotiations, nothing has changed.
Order. The Prime Minister was heard, and when there was noise, I called for it to stop, and the same must apply to the Leader of the Opposition. No one in this chamber will shout the right honourable gentleman down. Don't even bother trying, you're wasting your breath. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. But I do welcome the commitment that the fee for EU citizens to apply for settled status will be waived. Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister was fond of saying that this is the best possible deal on the table. It is the only possible deal on the table. But our EU negotiating partners are clear, and I quote, "Unanimously, the European Council have always said that if the UK chooses to shift its red lines in the future to go beyond a simple free trade agreement, then the EU will be immediately ready to give a favourable response." The House voted to hold the referendum. It also voted to trigger Article 50. There is a clear majority of this House to support a deal in principle and to respect the referendum result. But it requires the Prime Minister to face reality and accept her deal has been comprehensively defeated. Instead, we now understand the Prime Minister is going back to Europe to seek concessions on the backstop. Can I ask the Prime Minister this? What is the difference between legal assurances and concessions? What makes her think that what she tried to renegotiate in December will succeed in January? Mr Speaker, this really does feel a bit like Groundhog Day. So, the first thing she must do is recognise the clear majority in this House against leaving without a deal and rule out no deal and stop the colossal waste of public money planning for an outcome. Questions too must be asked of the Chancellor. He reassured businesses that no deal would be ruled out by the Commons. Yet, he is sanctioning £4.2 billion to be spent on an option he believes will be ruled out. The Foreign Secretary said last week it was very unrealistic to believe the House of Commons would not find a way to block no deal. Mr Speaker, can I ask the Prime Minister to meet first with her Chancellor and her Foreign Secretary and see if they can convince her to do what is in her power to rule out no deal? And if she will not do that now, will she confirm to the House that if an amendment passes that rules out no deal, she will implement that instruction? The Prime Minister agreed the backstop because of her pledge to the people of Northern Ireland to avoid a hard border. But no deal would mean a hard border in Ireland and break the Prime Minister's commitment. Is she seriously willing to accept a hard border? But today heralds the start of a democratic process where this House will debate amendments that will determine how we navigate Brexit. Of course, the government tried to block us ever getting to this stage. They wanted us to have no democratic scrutiny whatsoever. Labour set out, and I believe there may be a majority in the House, for such a proposal for a new comprehensive customs union with the EU that would include a say, a strong single market deal that delivers frictionless trade, and ensure no race to the bottom on workers' rights or indeed any other of the important regulations and protections we have. We will, as we've said consistently from the beginning, back amendments that seek to rule out the disaster of no deal. And, as we've said, will not rule out the option of a public vote. So, Mr Speaker, no more phony talks. Parliament will debate and decide. And this time, Mr Speaker, I hope and expect the government to listen to this House.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I just say to the right honourable gentleman, he says no more phony talks. It would be nice just to have some talks with him on this issue. Because he makes lots of claims about what has been said in the talks that have been held so far. But actually he doesn't know, because he didn't turn up to those talks. And I come back to him, he makes a great deal about the issue of no deal. He said that there is a consensus. I think he said there was a view across this House that supported a deal in principle and wanted to deliver on Brexit. That's exactly what I want to sit down and talk to him about. Because what we need to see is what is it that will secure the support of this House to enable us to leave the European Union with a deal. and we are continuing to listen to groups across the House in order to find the way to secure that support. Now, he talks about ruling out no deal. As I said in my statement, there are only two ways that you can ensure that no deal does not happen. One is to revoke Article 50, to reverse the decision of the referendum and to stay in the European Union. That would be a betrayal of the referendum decision that was taking place in 2016. And the other way is to agree a deal with the European Union. And it is precisely about finding a way that we can secure the support of this House for a deal that I'm talking with members across the House about and want to talk with the Right Honourable Gentleman about. So I hope, from what he said today, that he will reconsider his decision not to attend those talks. He asked me to, he complained about the amount of money that was being spent. He talked about £4.2 billion being spent and how that money should actually be spent in other ways. I see the Labour Party have put out a press release saying that money should be spent in other ways. What the Right Honourable Gentleman might not have noticed is that actually that £4.2 billion is not all money that's being spent on no deal. If we stop spending that money, then we wouldn't be prepared for a deal either. So he needs to recognise that actually government has to spend money to ensure that we are in a position, whatever the outcome of the negotiations with the European Union, whether we leave with a deal or in a no-deal circumstance. So I say once again to the Right Honourable Gentleman and across the House, for those who are concerned about no deal, that means we should be leaving with a deal. But what we need to find is the way that this House we can secure the support of this House for a deal. What has been clear from the discussions that we have had so far is the wide variety of views that are held around this House on this issue. But when it comes to it, we all need to be able to look our constituents in the eye and say that we did the right thing by them. That is leaving with a deal that we ensures we deliver on the referendum and protect their jobs. That is what the government is about, that is what we're working on, and that is what we will deliver.